Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. And as part of the Miami University Alumni Association's webinar series, and in partnership with the College of Education, Health, and Society, as part of the Changemakers series, today we present Impacts of the National Teacher Shortage. Joining us for the conversation today are Dean of the College of Engineering, or not Engineering, my apologies, Education, Health, and Society, Dean Jason Lane, Julia Indalecio, Director of Talent Acquisition and Staffing for Cincinnati Public Schools, Marlon Stiles Jr., Superintendent of Middletown City Schools, Rex Howard, a teacher at Creekview Elementary School within Middletown City School District, and Kenny Glenn, Cincinnati Program Associate with the Literacy Lab and the Men Fellowship Program. Welcome to you all, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Questions were collected during registration, and our panelists will address some of those throughout the webinar today. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions by clicking the Ask a Question button on the bottom of your screen. With all of that, I will turn it over to the Dean of Education, Health, and Society, Jason Lane, to get the conversation started. Welcome.
Thanks, Molly. We are delighted to be here, and welcome to everybody who is joining us on this day for this important conversation. We know that across the country, you can hardly open a newspaper these days without seeing a headline about a teacher shortage affecting most states in this country, and that includes Ohio as well. We're delighted to be able to convene this conversation, one that we have been in-depthly engaged in for about a week now. Just to share his background, last Wednesday, we launched with our partners at Cincinnati Public Schools the scaling of what we call Teach Cincinnati, which is an intentional pipeline to recruit more youth, particularly youth of color, into the teaching profession. The first 7 of those students matriculated here at Miami this past September, and so we're delighted to be with CPS and that program. And then last Friday, we held or hosted the first of 5 regional convenings across the state, where the focus has been on the teacher shortage and how do we as a region come together across K-12, across higher ed, across the community members, and across even our state level officials to really have meaningful conversations, not just about what could we do, but actually trying to figure out how do we move forward as a region to address the shortage, which is affecting a large number of our districts and our schools. We're going to get really in depth into this, but just to say, this is something that is more than a workforce issue for education. This is probably one of the most critical workforce challenges that affects every community and every state. The entire talent pipeline is built on having great teachers in our schools. And if we don't have great teachers, that is going to disrupt the learning of so many of our students across career paths, no matter where they go. And so we really believe that addressing the teacher shortage is foundational to ensuring that Ohio remains in a leadership role, right, in terms of attracting new businesses, having engaged citizenry, and really ensuring that we are a state that can continue to provide high caliber educational opportunities for students. So Julia, let me turn to you. You're the Director of Human Resources for Cincinnati Public Schools, the 3rd largest district in Ohio. You spend a lot of your time dealing with how do I make sure I've got high quality teachers, in our classrooms. So could you give us a lay of the land a bit about what you're seeing?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the panel, and thanks for the great question. So there is a lot that goes on in school districts, but the most important thing that we're doing is educating young people. And in order to do that education, we need high quality teachers. So we are in a conundrum, and it's one that we saw building over the last many years. But it seems to be heightened right now, which is a teacher shortage. So that's real. People will say, is there really a teacher? It's absolutely real. And I could tell you by our vacancy report that we are still seeking teachers, and it's November. And so the real tragedy of all that is that we have kids who want to learn, families who are choosing Cincinnati Public to educate their kids. And so we're trying to do a lot of work that is both short term and long term for for negotiating this teacher shortage. So in the short term, we're taking advantage of alternate educator licensure pathways, and we're looking at helping some of our paras pipeline through becoming a paraprofessional or as teacher's assistant into a role of a teacher based on their education and qualifications. We're using substitute teachers and training them up and helping them to hop on that alternate pathway. And we're doing longer term effects like strategies, like our partnership with Miami University that we're so proud of, our Teach Cincinnati. That program is really looking at young people who are interested in coming into the profession and helping them to see that it is a profession that is worth spending your lifetime in. And I know for me, this is my 35th year in Cincinnati Public, having been a teacher and a curriculum manager, some other roles. But the thing that I'm most passionate about is connecting people who want to change kids' lives with classrooms where that can happen. And so it's a lot though right now. We're already thinking about what we're going to do for next year while we're still kind of in the midst of trying to fill all of our roles. We have 3,000 teachers in Cincinnati Public Schools, so we have a large number of teachers, and it's just not always easy to fill all those roles. And so I think one of the things that we have to do is to lean into retention as much as recruitment, and make sure that we're creating spaces where people want to be, where they feel valued and trusted, and that they want to come to work every day and they feel like they're making a difference. And so all of that is all part of this discussion, quite honestly.
Maybe you could help us understand this from a long view perspective as well. I think a lot of times we say, boy, COVID hit and then X, Y, or Z happened. But COVID, I think in many ways exasperated a trend that was already happening. This isn't COVID caused, and maybe COVID increased in some ways. And we saw some data last week that talked about the supply side of this, that in Ohio, that we've seen a reduction in students coming through that pipeline by about 50% over the last 10 years, right? So 50% fewer people coming through those traditional pipelines to earn a credential. But could you talk a little bit more on, from the district side of this, what have you seen, as a trend over time? And, well, I guess I'm maybe saying COVID did exasperate this, but I'm assuming this was a trend that was in the works for a number of years.
Yeah, I completely agree that this is definitely a trend. I mean, we used to say, 10 years ago when I started in HR that, math, science, special ed, those are the high needs areas. And now I can tell you fully that everything's a high needs area. There aren't universities are doing a great job of preparing students to become teachers, but not enough pre-service teachers are entering those fields. They're seeing other options or opportunities. Because I think part of teaching, and we need to think about this. I was just talking with someone yesterday about how do we get outside of the box a little bit. Teaching is a pretty prescribed work day. It's a pretty prescribed work year. There are a lot of people would say, wow, it's a great field because you're off in the summers, you're off at Christmas. And there's a lot of truth to that. But I still have people every day. There's not a sub that calls in, almost none, that wants to sub, that wants to work 5 days a week. I think one thing that COVID may have done is changed people's tempo about how they want to work, right? The cadence of work. This idea that I'm going to do this 5 days a week for the rest of my life is pretty daunting. And our student teachers tell us they plan to teach for, I don't know, maybe 5 years, 8 years, something like that. And then I'm going to try something else. They don't know what that is yet. But it's a different, when I started teaching, I was like, I'm going to be a teacher my whole life. And I didn't. I ended up changing career paths, but still within this field. These young people are not always saying that. And so it's our job to create a space and to create pipelines within our districts so they can manage a career that doesn't necessarily leave education, but maybe changes the face. Maybe they become a counselor, a speech pathologist after they were a teacher, or maybe they become a principal or a superintendent like Marlon. So there's lots of opportunities within the field, but that's our job, is to really create some pipelines for people so they can see the wider view. And I know in our district, we're lucky because we're huge. And so a teacher doesn't just have, like I was a teacher, but I was out of classroom training people. And that kind of got the bug for me to see the strategy end of this. But quite honestly, all those shortage areas are real. And we have to just keep working really hard to make sure that people can see that there are options within the field in terms of retention. And it may not be teaching every year, but it may have to be things like, how do I create job shares for teachers so that so I can be both a stay-at-home mom and a teacher, or a stay-at-home dad and a teacher? Or how can I do things like allow different kinds of leave? That is honestly what some of the younger teachers coming into the profession are looking for, is some more flexibility built in, and that's tough in our calendar the way we are.
Yeah, it's a great point. I remember a conversation on last year with one of our student teachers who shared, when I came into college, I was prepared for a lifetime to be a teacher. Now that I see the headlines, I realize I'm going to be burnt out in 5 years, right? It's sort of a sad that, she's not even out yet in the field and she's thinking I'm going to be burnt out. So we've got to be thinking about on the ground. I should also share before I move forward that while the enrollments in Ohio are down by 50%, Miami's enrollments continue to increase in teacher education. So I know we got a lot of folks on the line here, but we've had 5 years of growth in teacher ed, which is great for us. Rex, let me bring you in now. You're frontline teaching in the classrooms. What are you seeing in terms of how teachers are responding to this? How are the shortage affects everybody in many ways, both the fact that we don't have enough substitutes and permanent teachers. But can you reflect, from the front lines? What are you seeing in this space and hearing from your colleagues?
Yeah, definitely. There's a shortage. It's real. We have positions open. We also have things that happen during the year. So maybe a teacher will be out taking care of a family member. Maybe they'll have an accident and they'll have to be out, and we're having a hard time filling those spots. So it's definitely a real thing. And as far as what we're doing, everybody's just trying to be flexible in the building, making sure we're covering as much as we can. We've got like an all hands-on approach. So from the principal down, everybody's just doing their best, pitching in. But we definitely feel a shortage. It's definitely something that's real.
I have a third grader in Lakota schools, and she shares that when her teacher's out for a day, right, there are 5 different people that are probably coming in to that environment to pick up the slack. I think to your point of flexibility, it's a lot harder to get permanent subs in, even for a day, right? And everybody from your superintendent to principals to other teachers are stepping in, and that has an impact, right, on their ability to be effective teachers also. Could you talk a little bit about that, sort of about that, how that the lack of a teacher in one classroom affects others who have to step in?
Yeah, so you might have to cover on a planned period, or sometimes we'll split classes. So we'll have, so for instance, I teach 4th grade, there's 3 classes. If one person is out and we have to split, then the other 2 will get half of that 3rd class. So you're trying to teach for instance, I teach math, so I'm trying to teach my math class and also make sure I'm doing my best to teach what the other teacher left. So it's just, yeah.
So it affects everybody, right? Not just the students, but our teachers.
Oh yeah, definitely affects everybody. We've even had central office come in, substitute sometimes. So it's everybody hands on.
Yep. So, one of the crises we have in this is not just teacher shortage, but we also have a teaching profession that does not reflect the changing demographics of our students. There's a lot of data out there that shows that, the percentage of students, teachers who are Black, well below the number of students who are Black, the number of teachers who are Hispanic, well below the numbers of students who are Hispanic. And a lot of research will show that all students benefit from having a more diverse workforce. And we really know that our students from diverse populations really benefit from making sure that they have teachers who look like them. And so you, Rex and Marlon, you're wearing these bright purple sweatshirts, the Admiral Squad. Could you talk about the Admiral Squad and what you're trying to do to address the teacher shortage and ensure that we've got more diversity in our classrooms?
Rex, you want to jump in first, then I'll go second. Is that cool?
Yeah, if you just talk about what Admiral Squad is about.
Yeah.
We're just the Black male teachers in the district, just trying to make sure that other students see us. We're in the building. We work together to try to, one, uplift each other, uplift the students, and then also there's that hiring piece and bringing and retaining Black male teachers.
Rex covered it beautifully, right? The calling of Black males in the profession. I would like to share, if you don't mind, just take a quick moment for our Miami family to just talk about the framework around Admiral Squad. We made a commitment here at Middletown City School District to hire 25 Black male certified educators to be in the classrooms to educate our children over the next 5 hiring seasons. Some like to call Black males in education unicorns. I just like to talk about the statistic 2%. 2% of all educators in this country are Black males. Period. End of story. So our commitment is to change that perspective here in Middletown City School District. We'll frame it up for you super fast. Yes, we're wearing purple hoodies because we have a desire to be our authentic selves. We don't want to be seen as disciplinarians in education like we often are. You know the narrative around that piece there. But what we've decided to do is look at this from the window of recruitment and retention. Oftentimes, when folks start talking about diversifying their workforce in education, it purely is around pipeline work and purely is around recruitment efforts. If you follow the deep statistics, there's definitely need to make sure we keep our Black males and our diverse workforce in education after they've gotten into our school district. So we are working with a BIPOC organization called He Is Me, working with a gentleman named Robert Hendricks, alumni of Miami University, from my understanding. Shout out to Miami alumni on the call today. But Robert's organization, He Is Me, has partnered with us and Miami University to put together a program in our 6th grade building where we take Black males who are undecided in higher ed and we get them involved in mentoring youth here at Middletown City School District to allow them to get really excited like I am to find a passion for working with youth. That passion will ultimately lead them into a teacher preparation program at Miami University where they have the opportunity to pursue their licensure, right? That's the entry point into the profession. That's the recruitment effort that we have. It really debunks this slow motion pipeline work that we typically have done in education. Really allows us to accelerate the number of people interested, especially Black males in the profession. Our desire is to hire those Black males once they get their certification, come right back to the district, continue to educate the kids you originally mentored as they were in 6th grade. That is the recruitment side of it. On the retention side of it, we've created the Admiral Squad. We can break the Admiral down for you at a later date. But the framework here on the retention piece is we've created, let's call it what it is, our own brotherhood, an affinity group inside our school district where every Black male employee is a member of the Admiral Squad, where we can be our authentic selves. As Rex said, we can lean on each other, provide professional development for each other. On in-service next week, we're not going to math training around resources. We're going to spend time collectively as an affinity group, getting to know one another and talk about professional standards for Black males in education and how we can impact our school district. Would love to share more about it. Be on the lookout or reach out to us anytime. Happy to share about these purple shirts and what Admiral Squad means and what we're trying to do for kids.
No, that's terrific. And we'll circle back to some of this in a minute, Marlon. So thank you for that and all the work you're doing to ensure that we are advancing equity in our schools. You talked about recruitment piece of this. And so let me bring in Kenny Glenn. Now, Kenny, you are working with the Leading Men Fellowship in Cincinnati, really on an alternative pathway to incite men of color to think about education and teaching. And so could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the Leading Men Fellowship?
Yeah, absolutely. So Leading Men Fellowship is a organization within the Literacy Lab, which is a nonprofit headquartered in DC. It just came to Cincinnati this year, as well as Atlanta and Phoenix, Arizona. But we hired this year 20 young men of color between the ages of 18 and 24. And we placed them in preschool classrooms as literacy coaches. So they're not the lead teacher, not an assistant teacher, but they're there to help the students become kindergarten ready by increasing their reading and writing skills. So the recruitment aspect of that and getting the young men interested is you get to be who you did not have. So Mr. Stiles, he was actually my principal back in high school. So it's always a great connection between me and him. Mm-hmm. He's actually the reason why I'm interested in education. But the pull from recruitment to the young men is being who you did not have. So as a preschooler all the way up to 12th grade, it's very rare that those students and these young men had a male of color in the classroom. So in preschool, they are giving that to the students, but then also get to see what it's like to provide the type of impact that they needed. And also a new career path for them, because teaching isn't something that they saw themselves doing or thought they would enjoy, but because when they were in school, they didn't even see themselves.
What do you think most attracts the individuals you're working with back into education?
I would say unbiased, but me and then the program manager, Carlton Collins. So Carlton Collins just won the Cincinnati NAACP Educator of the Year Award. And then I recently transitioned into education after graduating from Miami in accounting, but then serving on a school board, former professional athlete, so like an entrepreneur. So all of these experiences that we have, we get to give to these young men. So not only are we just placing them in classrooms, we're actually leading them to be better men. So providing mentorship, providing professional development, providing all types of resources that we need. So not only giving that sense of belonging, but the full circle of needs that we have as human beings.
No, that's great. And, I think we need all these different pathways coming in. One of the stats we heard last week was that there are twice as many citizens of Ohio or people in Ohio that with a teaching degree as there are teaching right now. And so when we talk about, a shortage, in some ways, we've got people who are qualified and credentialed to be in the classroom, but a lot of them are not interested for whatever reason. They don't, or they're not choosing not to be in the classroom. And so I don't know if any of you could talk about, what's happening in the schools right now, or what do we need to be changing or thinking about the schools that we can improve conditions to encourage folks to come into teaching. And Julia, one of the questions we had from a panelist was, is there a possibility for those with lapsed licenses to be able to be reinstated? And maybe you could talk about that special license that's now available in Ohio, and then we can talk about the conditions in schools.
Sure. So it's interesting that we're talking about that because we right now just polled all of our retired teachers for the last 5 years to start calling them to see if some of them are interested, based on, in part, the fact that the Ohio Department of Education has created a new license called the reinstatement license. And it's just what it says. It's if somebody has a license that lapsed or is no longer in effect, expired. This is a license that allows them just a little easier pathway to get back into a school district. And so in that license, you need to have had a license and then have a school district that wants to hire you, that basically sponsors you for that license. And so all that information is available on Ohio Department of Education. And if you just type in reinstatement license, you're going to find a lot of information about that and exactly the process for doing it. They have a really nice, clear map. And that becomes critical because as we think about who is our hiring pool, we're looking at both ends of that spectrum, right? We're looking at people who are just coming out of college. We're looking at people who maybe decide to stay at home or do a different career field, which we often find is the case, that people will have, they may have a science degree and an education and a degree in, say, science ed, and they decide to go work in a lab for a few years. And then they say, well, I think I'd like to teach now, but they graduated 7 years ago. So their license is lapsed at this point. They didn't do the resident educator program, et cetera. And so this is an opportunity for them to come back in. So one of the things that we have to do in human resources, and I know in whatever facet you are working in, and I believe that in a school district, everybody's a recruiter. I mean, I just firmly believe that everybody is a recruiter, because if I'm out to dinner and I'm talking about my school district and I'm like hyping it up, the table next to me, they might have somebody who's interested in working for us, and they're hearing that and they're asking questions. And so we all have to make sure that our narrative, we want to control our narrative around what the school's doing, make sure that we're promoting our good news about things. But I do think when there are people out there looking for work, that licensure is, as Marlon said, that's the key to getting into a school district. And so I do appreciate ODE offering this license, because there are people who are career changers who maybe start in education, decide to do something else and want to come back. There are people who are retired and I talk to them all the time, who would say, I'd love to come back, but I just don't want to deal with the license piece. And we can help them with that. And now we have another tool that can help them with that, which is going to be really critical when we look at all the shortage areas. And as you said, Dr. Lane, the fact that there are a lot of people that have licenses that are choosing not to come into a classroom. And then it is getting really reflective about what it is that we can do to create a space where people want to be.
So, there was a poll that came out a couple of years ago that showed, for the first time in 50 years, more than 50% of teachers would not encourage their own children to become teachers, which sends a very interesting message about how teachers are thinking about teaching, right now. Marlon, you've done a lot in the equity space and try to change culture, within the district. Could you talk about what can we do, or what are you doing to try to change that rhetoric, that thinking, that how do we get more teachers to be recruiters for future teachers, right, including their own children?
You just nailed it, right? It's narrative, it's storytelling. The storytelling our profession has grabbed a hold to right now is the narrative that's causing the teacher shortage to be accelerated. What if we change the narrative, the same narrative that we found joy in prior to this current crisis with the teacher shortage? So what I would say here in Middletown, and Mr. Howard can attest to this, when we got back from summer, it was about one hashtag, right? It's about hashtag joy in education. Can you find, let's go there for just a second. Can we find those goosebump, hair-raising, joyful moments in education that keeps us excited about what we're doing? Can we tell the story around those goosebump, joyful moments so that other people get excited about what's happening in education? And hopefully somebody gets a goosebump, hair-raising moment and they say, you know what, I want to get into education and be a teacher. Mm-hmm. It's about the narrative that we're telling. So in our district, another thing we focused on is this idea of family. We tried our best. Now we're probably swinging and missing in some areas. There's probably ways we can get better, but we try our best to hold true to this hashtag MIDI rising type family feel in our district, where everyone feels like they've got a sense of belonging, regardless of skin color, sexual orientation does not matter. We want you to feel like you belong and find your space. Mm-hmm. The last thing what I'll say is about getting more people excited about getting into the profession. If you could just, I don't know the technology features, but if you could flash Kenny's picture up on the main screen real quick for me, right? Take a look at Kenny. Now, if you could flash Mr. Howard's picture up on the screen for me, please. Mm-hmm. The question is, what can we do to get more people interested in the profession? When it comes to Black males being interested in education, number one, we have to tell them that they're needed and they're valued, because that does not happen. And number two, we need to have those Kenny Glenn, those Rex Howard photos on the screen and those people live in front of our kids so that they can see themselves in education. I'll leave you with representation matters. The Admiral Squad is about providing our kids representation from people who look, sound, feel, same hair as them, although I had to cut mine down because it's going bald. But representation matters. Our kids need to see Black male educators sitting in front of them, 5th grade math teachers, elementary counselors, high school administrators, superintendents, human resources directors. Our kids need to see themselves in the profession. I believe if we continue to do a couple of those things, we can kind of change that narrative and get some excitement going back in the profession.
Oh, go ahead, Kenny.
Yeah, so Julia on Friday during the panel, she mentioned how we live in a gig economy now. So teachers do not want to be, nor anyone want to be in a building 5 days a week. And like, wait, I can make the same amount of money and stay home for 2 or 3 days a week and be less stressed out. I'd much rather, and not have to put on jeans. I would much rather do that and stay home in my shorts. But then she also talked about how everyone is a recruiter, and Mr. Stiles touched on this as well, how you have to be very good at storytelling, but then also changing the narrative. So most of the time, teachers only tell one side of the story. They say, oh, I'm a glorified babysitter, or I don't get paid enough, or this isn't worth the stress. It's like, why are you even here then? If all you're going to do is complain. And then if all you do is complain, why would I be drawn to become you? That makes no sense at all. I would much rather go to the sexier profession who only talks about the good, but then also talks about the bad as well. So we need both sides of the story. Something else I wanted to touch on is how schools tend to be a microcosm of society. So Marlon Stiles touched on it, how Black males are only 2% of the teaching profession. But what draws us into schools? Because most Black males feel a lot of trauma during school, and especially when they graduate. They never want to step foot in the building again. Because when you see a Black male in a school building across the nation, most of the time it is the disciplinarian, a janitor, the music teacher, or athletic coaches. And these young men have to see that they are way more than those aspects, because we're the most likely to get kicked out of class, most likely to get suspended, but most least likely to go to college, or most likely to end up in jail. And we have to change those narratives. So they need to see themselves in a profession, and schools is a great way to start that.
So I agree with you. And Marlon talked about the joy in education. Rex, could you talk about maybe, what was your joy in education? What brought you into the teaching field and keeps you there?
what brought me in probably would be my mom. She's been a long time para. She actually works in the district too. She went back to school when I was in high school. So I got to kind of see what she was doing in the special education side of things, and just really kind of fell in love with what she was doing with the kids, and thought that I could replicate that, and kind of, for me, just be a little bit better of a teacher than I had. So I thought that I could fill that gap for some students, and that's probably what keeps me into.
That's awesome. I was just going to add that my husband and I are both educators.
Oh, that's great, Marlon.
Right? Joy in education. Look at that picture right there, right? I know I got the blur on right now, but this is education. This is why if we change the narrative, more people will consider the profession. Mr. Howard does it every single day. Kids light up when they see him because he's in his passionate place in life. So we get more Rex Howard moments in this profession, I think we'll see that narrative shift. Like, look at his face, right? When he walks down the hallway, kids run and hug him. There is joy in education. We need to talk about it, right? Nobody gets burnt out from having joy in what they get to do every single day. Burnout never happens when you're experiencing joy. And Mr. Howard probably is not even close to even considering burnout, because when he walks down the hall, those kids' faces light up just like his, because he loves what he does every single day. We need more people to feel like those Rex Howard moments.
Mm-hmm.
Julia?
Yeah, so I love that. Great picture too. Great photo. My husband and I are both teachers, and we're also the proud owner of a Miami freshman who's majoring in secondary math education. And people said to us, she's really good at math and science. You want her to go into teaching? Like, why teaching? And I was like, yeah, we're super proud. Like, she's going to change the world. And that's not an understatement. Rex is changing the world, right? He's changing the world because he's affecting kids' lives every single day and giving them hope when maybe others haven't. And so I think that's what it's funny and because so many people that said that to me, you want her to be a teacher, are teachers. And I said, absolutely. But you know what? You can control what it is that you put into the profession and what you're going to get out of it, just by the attitude and that you have going into it. And I think, I know, kudos to Miami because already she's already been invited to go to a conference, within the first month of her being a freshman there. And she doesn't have the same last name as I do. So there's no association there, but it's just that she's already had opportunities to feel like she's part of the College of Ed. And I think that you touched on this, Marlon, when you were talking about the sense of belonging, that everybody's invited to the table. And it's important that we do that. I'm a Pacific Islander, and when I first came and I had an opportunity to go back to the islands and teach, I decided to stay here because I really wanted to. I had an opportunity to go to Guam and teach right out of Ohio State, and I decided not to. And it's one of the regrets I have, maybe. But in lieu of that, I got to come to Cincinnati Public and really see other populations that were being underserved and be able to reach out and say, I know your story a little bit. It might not be the same exact story, but you're welcome and I want to hear from you. And I think we have to do the same to our teachers. We have to make sure that our teachers have a nurturing environment. I mean, Kenny, you talked about that. If a student felt like they could not wait to get out of school and there's no way I do that, it's going to be harder to get them back into school to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. And so we also want to create environments where students want to be. So we want to create safe environments where it's a joy to learn, where we're creating curiosity and we foster creativity and we welcome diversity. And we want to create schools that harbor those pieces so that then when kids look back in the mirror, like, I could do that. I could imagine doing that. And so for a lot of people, they may not feel that at 18 or 21 even, but we see a lot of people coming back into the profession saying, I did this for a long time and I always wanted to be a teacher, but people told me that's not a good choice. And so now I'm 35 and I think it's too late. And I was like, it's not too late. And we'll help walk you to down that road.
Can you talk about some of the programs? You mentioned them early on, I think a little bit about paraprofessionals and things, Julia, but Can you talk a little bit about some of the programs that are in place out there for people who are maybe more not non-traditional pathways, right, to come in and consider teaching as a profession?
Sure. I'm sure that Marlon's group experience at Middletown has the same kind of pieces in place too, that we will see principals who say, oh, this paraprofessional is so fantastic. Like they do a better job, controlling the environment or working with kids than some of the teachers do. We got to get her into teaching. And so we have programs. We have partnered with Miami in the past regarding paraprofessionals and trying to help them get their degree so that they can get a teaching license. We're working under the also with the alternative educator program. So the alternative licensure says I have a degree in something else. I have a degree in history, and I was going to go to law school. I decided that wasn't it. In thinking about what I really want to do is be a teacher. And so there are some parameters around it, but it's a relatively smooth transition to get a teaching license. And my caution around that is that those people haven't had any pedagogy. And so our job at the district is, if we decide to hire alternative educators, that we need to do the good work of mentoring them and providing them that critical piece around what does it mean to teach kids, not just to know your content, but to teach kids. Because we've had a number of people that were chemists at Procter and Gamble or were accounting majors that wanted to be teachers. And that's all great because they know their content really well. But what they may not have as much expertise in is child development. And knowing math and teaching someone else how to do math are not the same thing. And so we have to kind of work with those folks to make sure they get the techniques and strategies and pedagogy and tools down pat, and constantly work with them with mentoring and coaches and such.
And, I appreciate that, because I think there are a lot of options for folks to come back into the profession. I have to give a shout out to one of our faculty members, Martha Castaneda, who received a $2.5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education to bring paras and parents into being TESOL faculty.
Yes.
So, there's also scholarship opportunities out there
Yes.
for particular areas of high need as well. For folks. Kenny, you've got a program that is really more about encouraging people to think about education as a career path, and then we hope that they will move into a program, right, to become educators. Could you talk about the genesis of that program? What gave rise to the idea behind the fellowship?
It is that 2% number, but then also the high impact that Black males have when we're in a school building. So I mentioned earlier how Mr. Stiles is my principal. But without him being there, I don't sit here today, nor do I consider education. But there wouldn't have been another instance in high school where I saw myself in a leadership role outside of the janitor or coaches. So that was the genesis of it, just seeing the need for Black men in education, but then also the lack of it. So we need more of us. In order to do that, we have to give ourselves an example, but then also taste. So it's kind of like an internship. So at Miami, I was an accounting major and did 2 internships. And I was like, wait a minute, I actually do not like this at all. Exit stage left. So they're figuring out if they like it or not. And right now, all of them actually literally love it. And I'm not just saying that just because, no, they truly do love it. I get text messages every day. Said, man, thank you for recruiting me and giving me the job opportunity. This is way more than working at a Walmart or a Speedway. Like, I'm actually making a difference in these students' lives. Get to see the progression of their minds, but then also when I walk into the building, I'm literally like a superhero. And everyone wants that sense of belonging. It's literally psychological and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So that's the genesis of the program, especially bringing it to Cincinnati.
Remind us of the age group you're focusing on.
Yep, these young men are between the ages of 18 and 24, and they go into preschool classrooms.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Rex, are you coming off mute?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, did you want to jump in? If not, I got a question for you.
Oh, no, sorry, I was coughing.
Okay. So we've had some questions pop up from folks that deal with, essentially, this all sounds great, but schools also aren't all rainbows and roses right now. And teachers are going to walk into environments that, yes, we want them to find joy, but there's a reality that not all of them are going to have joy every single day, right, in the classroom. And I know for us, we talk a lot about resiliency. How do we build resiliency in our teachers? How would you talk to an aspiring teacher that both inspires them to continue to be a teacher, but also gives them the lay of the land so they understand the reality of what they may be walking into?
Yeah. So teaching is hard. It's not an easy profession. But when you start teaching, there's definitely that why. Why did you start teaching? What brought you in? And when things get real hard, you can just, hopefully you can look back on that and remember why. So why did you get into teaching? What are you here for? For me, it's the kids. I want to make Middletown a better place. I've lived here since I was 9. So whenever things get hard, I think about the kids. I think about Middletown. I think about what I want it to be when I'm done. And that just kind of keeps me going. But for other teachers, you're going to have to find that why and lock into it. Think about it when things get hard. And then just be real intentional about celebrating little things. If you can find little things throughout the day, they add up to some pretty good sized celebrations. So finding the little things, remembering your why, I think will get you through most of the hard times.
How has the Admiral Squad helped support you through some of that also?
For me, I'm not even going to lie. I was just pumped to get the invite. As a biracial guy, just to get that invite from Marlon and Mr. Edwards, I was like jumping up and down. Everybody was asking me why I was being weird, but just pumped. So just to like go into that room and you see the other guys, and I worked with Mr. Shores personally. He's another 7th grade teacher. Just to walk in, he's like, "Rex, what up?" And I was like, "Oh man, this is awesome." So just like seeing them, talking to them, everybody's just always real chill, real uplifting. So yeah, they definitely just help out with the moral support, the boost whenever you need it.
That's great. You know, having community matters, right? To be able to fall back on folks. And you also said something that I think is pretty meaningful. For you, part of what drives you is Middletown, because you are from Middletown and you believe in Middletown. You want Middletown to be a better place. And so part of what I hear in that is part of an argument for why Grow Your Own programs really become more important, right? That the more that we can encourage individuals from communities to come in and teach and go back to their community, in some ways they have, they have a particular vested interest in that community and the understanding of that community. Could you talk about that a little bit, about how being from there might help you in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I know Middletown very well. I know what the kids are going through. I've lived in a few different spots, so I know I don't know about all, but I know most of what's going on in the city and the town. I know their families. I grew up with them. I've played in the same parks as them. So like when things are happening, we can all relate. So yeah, we have this old saying about MIDI magic. And for me, it's definitely real. It's definitely something that I try to bring back and keep going. I don't want it to die on my watch. So we got to keep that MIDI magic going.
That's terrific. Julia, it brings me joy, by the way. I'm thinking about Marlon and joy, right? Just hearing you talk about that, you can even know joy in that space. Julia, part of Teach Cincinnati is a Grow Your Own model. The idea is that we help recruit students who want to become teachers, and they go through the program and they go back to Cincinnati, hopefully, right?
Yes.
Become teachers. I mean, from your perspective, could you talk about the Grow Your Own model and maybe why that is an important pipeline of teachers?
So, I would echo a lot of what Rex said, is that these are kids who know this area, have allegiance here, have families here. And, when we think about young people wanting to go into a district and change it, some of them are thinking about their own families and where do I want my own children to go? So we're excited about our partnership with Miami and having our first students from Aiken head up to Miami to start that cohort. In subsequent other schools, so Euler and Withrow were just added on with Aiken in that Grow Your Own model. So that kids there also, in thinking about affinity groups, have other groups of kids that they can meet with to say, I want to be a teacher. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm proud of that. And they can be proud of saying, I want to be a teacher, rather than saying, I don't know, maybe I'll be a teacher. Instead of that, we have people who are supporting those kids, who are cheering them on into the profession. And I think that makes a difference too. And the fact that they know that we're going to support them as they go to college, we're going to welcome them when they come back. For some of those students, helps see that whole cycle all the way through. But I think knowing the community, we know that in the Midwest, people will talk about, and there's certainly a cause to recruit from all over the place, because you do want a diversity in thought as well from all over the country. But in the Midwest, most people live about 20 miles from where they went to high school. And I mean, they work 20 miles from where they went to high school. And so, I mean, I'm an anomaly. I went to high school 60 miles from here. So I'm a way out of towner. Like, people are, it really, honestly, like, nobody, hardly anybody from Cincinnati is not from Cincinnati. And so if we're going to grow our own, we want to grow our own, and we want them to come right back to our district. Because they know us well, they grew up in it, and we're proud to have them back. And I'm always excited when CPS grads come back in and we can hire them back in.
And I have to share one of the things that was magical about last week when we launched the sort of scaling of Teach was we had several of the students who were here in Miami come back with us, and they went back into that high school, Aiken, right, as rock stars.
Mm-hmm.
Several of the current students who were there as juniors and seniors were coming up to me, telling me how excited they were to come to Miami and be a teacher.
Mhm.
So these are future, teacher ed students who are going back and are viewed as sort of the rock stars of their peers who are current in high school. That the energy in the room was just so remarkable to feel that and to see the excitement around students wanting to become teachers. It was just terrific.
Yeah, so they're changing the narrative. Like Marla and I were talking about changing the narrative. They're the ones who are writing the story. They don't want to hear from me. I'm 56. They're not excited to hear from me. They want to hear from people who are 18 and 19 and 20, who they can see themselves in the next year or two. That's the story. Like, that's the story. Those are the people whose footsteps they want to walk in. Like, they're like, that old lady, I don't know, whatever. But what they really want to know is, if it worked for Jemiah, who's at Miami, it could work for me.
Mhm.
I knew her. I sat by her in class. We had lunch together, and she's making a career of this, and she's at Miami becoming a teacher. And that could, if she can do it, I can do it, because I used to eat lunch with her. It's just those little. It's in the small steps that, like Rex was saying, it's those small wins that add up to these great big wins. And I think as that discussion becomes, we normalize education as a great career path instead of sort of apologizing for it as a choice. I think we'll see some changes, and some dramatic changes happen. And kudos to Miami for putting the time and effort into really launching the good work that you're doing.
Dr. Lane, I just listened in today, just a few takeaways from my perspective. I learned a lot. I've been writing a lot the whole time. You think about Kenny's initiative and Kenny's campaign to impact and influence in a positive way the teacher shortage. Think about Cincinnati Public's efforts as well, the Admiral Squad here in Middletown City School District, Miami University. My push would be very simple. I'm a Jay-Z fan. Any Jay-Z fans here?
Absolutely. 2 hands up.
I'm going back to one of his lyrics in the song Moment of Clarity. If you go back to that song, Moment of Clarity, he talks about his knowledge, some discovery, and doubling down and doubling his dollar. He's become a GOAT for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's time for us to think about a Jay-Z moment in the profession where we can double down on some things that have been proven to be successful. What are the bright spots when it comes to positively attacking this teacher shortage that we're facing? Kenny has shared one today. Cincinnati Public and Middletown, Miami, we've all shared a bright spot. But if you think about it, our bright spots are happening in isolation. Can we somehow creatively get outside of our boxed-in sandbox to think about systemically creating some efforts that are accessible by all across the region and the state so we can address the teacher shortage here in Ohio? If we double down on our bright spots, invite everyone in the family to the table to eat, we can hopefully inspire more to get into the profession. It's just a big takeaway today. A lot of celebrations on campaigns and programs. If we can harmonize some of those efforts for the collective, we might have a huge celebration in the profession.
You're speaking my language, Marlon. That's part of why we wanted to bring people together last week, just to begin to have a conversation. Because I don't think in the region we'd ever set a table that brought people together to really have a conversation, right, about these issues. And the region being really Cincinnati to Dayton, right, and covering that whole area. What would you suggest? What's a way to move forward with that? How do we come together as a region and begin to work together?
Is that for me, or you want somebody to answer that first?
No, that was for you. You raised it. So
Well, here's what I would say. I'm a big systems thinker, right? My first thing that I would say is let's personify the problem of practice. Problem of practice, we have a teacher shortage. Let's personify it. Let's find teachers, educators across the region and state, when we're statewide. Let's find teachers and let's hear their story. If someone has experienced burnout, let's personify it and let's hear their story so we can learn why. I don't have burnout, right? So how am I going to solve for someone who has burnout when I'm not experiencing? So let's personify first of all. Number two, what I would challenge this thing about is, can we get all the players to the table where everyone has a voice, including those who are experiencing what is causing the teacher shortage? And then let's just go through a process where we design up different things, starting with what's already working. Identify the bright spots that have been proven by the data. Talk about the alternative pathways and how they trended more towards a deeper green in the state data. Something's working there. What is the reason? Why? Is it working for people who are experiencing burnout or preventing burnout, or whatever the reasons may be? But let's identify those bright spots, and then let's create a system that's accessible for all. Let's bring everybody to the table and design something up. I feel like I'm repeating what I said before. I'm looking at this more of a process of people sitting at the table, but not people like me, people who are in a position, happy in a position, have been in education for 20 plus years. We need the people who are experiencing, contributing to the shortage to help us solve and go through different iterations on how to address the shortage and prevent it from rapidly increasing like it is. That would be my attempt. And the last thing I'll say, like I said before, change the narrative, right? We have talked about burnout. We've talked about whatever we're feeling around education right now. Flip the narrative. We've got to stop admiring the problem. I saw a quote the other day: in times of your failure, you got to keep your head up. In times of your successes, you got to keep your head down. Well, right now we're in failure, teacher shortage, right? So pick our heads up, change the narrative, and let's just get down to action-oriented work and see if we can make a bigger impact. That's where I'll start.
all right, that's terrific. Julia, how about you?
Yeah, that's a tough act to follow. I was taking notes like crazy on what Marlon was saying, because I believe all of that to be true. We're not going to solve the problem by in the meeting that we had on Friday, where we had lots of deans of education and professors and people like HR directors and superintendents. That's great. We got to ask the teachers, though. We got to ask the teachers, what is it that is causing you to think about leaving? We have to do stay interviews to find out what keeps you here. So that's been a conversation. I know that HR directors in this region communicate we get together on a monthly basis, and we communicate a whole lot in the in-between. And one of the things that just came out recently was people are saying, can everybody share your stay interviews? A stay interview is why do you remain? What causes you to remain? So I did that a couple of years ago for my first, third, and fifth year teachers. And I want to continue that process of figuring out why people stay. That will help me answer some questions about why people leave. But to Marlon's point, when people are graduating from college's education and they tell you all at Miami or Ohio State or UC or wherever, I appreciate this, but I'm not doing this. Why? Let's find out why, and see if there's something that we could be doing different in pre-service education or in their field experience or student teaching that needs to be different. What is it about that? But we also have to continue to tell the story of those moments of clarity for teachers where they say, this is why I did this. This is why I went to this profession. There's one other licensure piece I just want to bring up. It's tangential, but the reason I bring it up is because there's also a supplemental license. So if someone's licensed as an English teacher, but they go, but my real passion is history, there's a way to get a history license pretty easily, or a math license pretty easily, and they can switch, kind of do career switching within education, and sometimes that reignites people who are experiencing burnout. I've been teaching science for 18 years. I'm tired of getting cotton balls at midnight, and what I really love is math. And so I could go get a supplementary license in math, and I find out that I love ESL students or ELL students, and I want to be an ESL teacher. I can combine all that and have almost like a very different career, the last half of my career than I had the first half, still in education. So even within education, it's not like you're in the same classroom for 35 years. That's what a lot of kids think, is I'm going to be in this for the same classroom, same year, same thing, in and out, year in, year out. And Rex could probably tell you, no year is the same. Kids change, his teaching changes, right? And so I think discerning what it is that causes people to leave, but also, or discerning why people leave. And then also thinking about people that, when we think about that retention track, what are some things that will cause people to stay? And some of it might be just tinkering with their licensure enough to allow them to teach something that they've become passionate in, maybe that wasn't originally.
Finding the fit, right, matters a lot. We've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to, just a heads up, I'm going to come back to each of you and ask you for a piece of advice to a future teacher, but I want to bring Kenny in really fast. Kenny, you're an entrepreneur. Started a new sort of initiative here. What can we learn from the work that you're doing on the ground that could help inform overall our thinking about pathways and recruiting, particularly men of color, into education?
Yeah, I would say make it comfortable, and make it comfortable to ask questions. So Rex raised some really good points where he talked about, he's from Middletown. So literally he's pouring into his younger self. But then also Mr. Stiles talked about a solution being these students, and Julie talked about this as well. They need to hear their story and the why. So why are teachers staying? Why are teachers leaving? So to touch both of those points, Rex pouring into his younger self, hear the why. Me being an entrepreneur as well. It's literally why I wrote this book. And I know it got blurry, but literally. So the title is Question Everything, Advice for Students and Graduates. So it's me giving advice to younger me on questions I wish I would have asked back then, but things that I know now and things that I did not know back then. So number one quote we hear from our elders or those close to us in age is, man, if I knew back then what I know now, I would do things totally different. But then by the time you realize that, students don't want to hear from you. So me being 25 and still relatively young and looking like these students, they want to hear from me. Then they also want to hear from their teachers and hear the real, true stories. So that's my take on it for sure.
All right. So then give us one piece of advice out of that book that you would give to a future teacher right now.
Struggle is inevitable and necessary. So it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows, no matter what profession you choose. We got this entrepreneur craze. I want to be an entrepreneur. I'm gonna make $1 million. All right, maybe you will not. Like maybe you just fail, but then you learn from it. So if you have struggles in the classroom and it gets hard, man, lean on mentors. Find teachers who have gone through those struggles and are succeeding and stayed in it. Like you need to be more solution oriented and not just complaining.
No, that's good. All right, struggles will be there, but we need to learn from them. Rex, what's your piece of advice?
My piece of advice would be to learn the kids as fast as you can, and play to their strengths and weaknesses, and then you can figure out the curriculum as you go.
That's great. Relationships matter, right? You got to know who your students are.
Yep.
Julia, how about you?
I would say do what you love and figure out how to make a career of it. And I hope if what you love is children, that you figure out that there's a lot of opportunity. One of my colleagues here always says, they didn't leave the good ones. The parents don't leave their good ones at home and send us the others. These are their best things. And so my belief, and I strongly, is that every parent wants what's best for their child. They may not be able to articulate it as clearly as we would like them to, or may not feel as comfortable coming into a schoolhouse because of their own situations they've had with school or what have you. But our job is to educate kids. And when people would say, what do you teach? And I was a high school teacher, I would say, I teach kids. I teach students every day. And they're like, but what do you teach? I said, well, I happen to teach some social studies, but what I teach is children. And so putting kids first at the front end of that sentence is really important for me.
Terrific. Marlon, final word.
Yeah, real fast. You are considering the profession because you've discovered your gift. And once you discover your gift, it feels good, right? So live in your gift. And as you explore the right fit for yourself, go find a Rex Howard in the profession, sit down with your Rex Howard and ask why, right? Why he is able, or that Rex Howard is able to live in their gift, and ask about the joy that person is experiencing on a daily basis, living in their gift in that position, doing what they do every day.
Well, the upside of webinars is we can bring you all together from various places. The downside is that we can't hear the rounds of applause that I know will be happening right now. To thank you all for your wisdom and your time. But I just want to say thanks for joining us on this important conversation. Marlon, you threw down the gauntlet. I think you're absolutely right. We got to keep moving forward on these regional approaches. We've got to work collaboratively and not compete with each other in this space to really make a difference. But each of you are living this every single day. So my thanks to you for all that you do out in the field every day to make sure that we've got great education happening for our students and our communities. So thank you all for joining us today. That's it for the Changemaker webinar this time, and we'll see you all soon.